He thought losing his job was the worst thing that could happen, until a mysterious email appeared in his inbox, offering something he never expected. The restaurant was a place of quiet sophistication, where dim lighting met crisp white tablecloths, and waiters moved like shadows between tables. Every evening, well-dressed patrons murmured over expensive dishes, their laughter blending with the faint clinking of glasses. For 19-year-old Jason, it was just another shift, a way to keep his head above water while juggling college and rent. He wasn't one of those kids with a safety net. There was no trust fund, no emergency fund, just the paycheck he relied on to stay afloat. He moved through the tables with precision, balancing an empty tray in one hand as he scanned the room. His boss, a man who never smiled, always said the best waiters were invisible, fast, efficient, but unnoticed. That was fine with Jason. He wasn't looking to be noticed. But then, it happened. At a corner table, a woman was adjusting her clutch when something slipped from her fingers. A small, sleek item, her phone maybe, tumbled to the floor and slid just beneath the edge of the table. She hesitated, glancing around as if debating whether to crouch down and retrieve it herself. Jason was nearby, clearing the next table over. Instinct kicked in before he even thought about it. He bent down, retrieved the object, and held it out to her. Their eyes met for a split second. That's when he realized who she was. Melania Trump. She accepted the item with a quiet thank you, barely above a whisper. Her expression unreadable. Jason gave a small, polite acknowledgement and turned away immediately, already moving to the next table. No big deal. Just a simple gesture. A reflex. He didn't think twice about it, but someone else did. From the far side of the restaurant, the manager had been watching. His expression didn't change, but his stance shifted slightly. He glanced toward the kitchen, then back at Jason, before disappearing into his office. Jason had no idea that in less than 24 hours, his life would change in a way he never saw coming. But that night, he had no reason to suspect a thing. Jason walked into work the next afternoon expecting nothing more than another exhausting shift. He clocked in, tied his apron, and made his way to the back where the pre-shift meeting was usually held. But before he could get there, his manager, Mr. Calloway, stepped in front of him. "Jason, in my office, now." The words were cold, clipped. Not a request. An order. Jason blinked, caught off guard. He had never been late, never missed a shift, and had never once received a complaint. His mind scrambled for a reason as he followed Calloway down the narrow hallway to the small office in the back. The moment the door shut, Jason knew something was off. Calloway didn't sit. He didn't offer Jason a seat either. He just folded his arms and exhaled sharply. "You violated protocol last night." Jason frowned. "What?" Calloway's jaw tightened. "You interacted with a high-profile guest without permission." Jason's stomach twisted. "Are you serious? I just picked something up for her. It took 2 seconds." Calloway shook his head. "That's not the point. We have strict policies for a reason. You're supposed to keep your distance. Do your job, not make yourself part of the experience." Jason let out a sharp breath, frustration rising. "I wasn't trying to be part of anything. I was just being polite." Calloway didn't budge. "Doesn't matter." She didn't file a complaint, but one of the other staff members saw it and reported it. "This restaurant serves elite clientele, and the last thing we need is an employee overstepping. We can't take that risk." Jason couldn't believe what he was hearing. Fired? Over this? He had spent months working double shifts, covering for others when they bailed, putting up with rude customers and impossible expectations, only to be tossed out over a meaningless moment that didn't even register as a mistake. "You're kidding," he muttered. Calloway's face remained stone cold. "Turn in your apron. Your last check will be mailed." That was it. No second chances. No warning. Jason stood there, his pulse hammering in his ears. He wanted to argue, to make him see how absurd this was, but one look at Calloway told him there was no point. So, he swallowed every bitter word rising in his throat, yanked off his apron and threw it onto the chair. "Fine." He didn't wait for a response. He turned on his heel, yanked open the door, and walked straight out of the restaurant. The late afternoon sun hit him like a slap as he stepped onto the sidewalk. The world outside didn't care that he had just lost his job. People kept walking, cars kept moving, and life carried on as if nothing had happened. Jason pulled his phone out of his pocket, stared at the screen, and debated his next move. But for the first time in a long time, he had no idea what to do next. Jason sat on the subway, staring at the floor, his thoughts a tangled mess. The rhythmic clatter of the train barely registered as he replayed the last 20 minutes over and over in his head. Fired, just like that. No warning, no second chance. The worst part? He had done nothing wrong. His fingers tightened around his phone. He could call his mom. She'd listen, tell him everything happens for a reason, but he wasn't in the mood for forced optimism. His dad would be another story. "You should have just kept your head down," he'd probably say. "Follow the rules." Jason wasn't ready for that conversation. The train jerked to a stop. He barely noticed until the automated voice called out his station. He stood, moving through the doors and stepping onto the crowded platform. The air smelled like metal and old newspapers. People pushed past him, rushing home, while he just stood there, stuck in his own head. Rent was due in 2 weeks. His books for next semester weren't cheap. He had a grocery list sitting in his notes app, filled with things he wouldn't be able to afford now. His jaw clenched as he walked up the stairs to street level. His apartment was a few blocks away, a tiny studio with a sink that dripped and a window that rattled in the wind. It wasn't much, but it was his, and now he had no idea how he'd keep it. The weight of it all pressed down on him. He pulled out his phone, scrolling through job listings, but nothing promising stood out. Host, bartender, delivery driver. None of them paid as well as the restaurant. By the time he reached his apartment, his frustration had curdled into exhaustion. He tossed his keys onto the counter, kicked off his shoes, and dropped onto the couch. The silence felt heavy. Maybe Calloway was right. Maybe he should have just walked past the table, ignored the whole thing. But that wasn't who he was. He stared at the ceiling, debating what to do next. Maybe tomorrow he'd print out his resume, hit up a few places in person. He'd figure it out. His phone buzzed. He barely glanced at it, assuming it was a junk email or some notification he didn't care about. But something about the subject line made him pause. "Your kindness did not go unnoticed." A strange chill ran through him. He sat up, his pulse picking up speed. It wasn't a name he recognized. No sender information that gave him a clue. Just those 6 words. His thumb hovered over the screen. But something told him this was about to change everything. Jason stared at the email, his heartbeat quickening. "Your kindness did not go unnoticed." That was it. No sender name, no additional context, just a subject line that felt both cryptic and deliberate. His fingers hesitated over the screen. A scam? A prank? His email wasn't exactly private, but something about this felt different. After a few seconds of indecision, he tapped it open. The message was short. "You did something yesterday that most people wouldn't. You helped without expecting anything in return. People like you are rare. If you're open to an opportunity, reply to this email." Jason read it twice, then a third time. His first instinct was skepticism. Nobody sends random job offers out of nowhere. And yet, this wasn't exactly a job offer, was it? No company name, no position mentioned, just a vague reference to what happened at the restaurant. Someone knew what he had done, but who? He leaned back against the couch, his mind racing. Could it be Melania Trump herself? No, that didn't make sense. People like her didn't send emails. They had assistants, teams, layers of security. Maybe someone else at the restaurant had seen the whole thing and felt bad about what happened. Or, his stomach twisted. What if this was some kind of setup? He clicked on the sender's email address. It wasn't familiar. Just a string of letters and numbers that didn't spell anything out. That was a red flag. But the way the message was written, it didn't read like a scam. No links, no requests for information. Just an invitation. Jason exhaled sharply. His brain told him to ignore it, to move on. But something deeper, curiosity maybe, tugged at him. He typed out a quick response. "Who is this?" He hit send. Less than a minute later, his phone vibrated. A reply. "We'll explain soon. Meet us tomorrow at 2 p.m. Madison Hotel, 14th floor. Jason's pulse pounded in his ears. No names, no details, just a place, a time. 1,000 warnings flooded his mind. He didn't know these people. He had no idea what they wanted. But buried beneath the uncertainty was something else. An itch he couldn't ignore. Because if he walked away from this, he'd always wonder what could have been. But the real question was, did he have the guts to show up? Jason barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, his mind circled back to the email, the invitation, the risk. By morning, he had convinced himself not to go at least a dozen times. But by noon, he was already pulling on a clean shirt and heading out the door. The Madison Hotel was in the heart of the city, towering over the busy streets like something out of a movie. Jason had never stepped foot in a place like this before. The kind of place where people had drivers and assistants, where the front desk staff barely glanced at you unless you looked like you belonged. As he stepped inside, the air smelled expensive. Polished wood, fresh flowers, something faintly citrus. His stomach churned, but he forced himself to move toward the elevators, pretending like he had every right to be there. He pressed 14 and watched the doors slide shut. The ride up felt endless. The doors opened into a quiet hallway. Plush carpet, soft lighting. Room 1403 sat at the end, slightly ajar. Jason hesitated. Was he really about to do this? Before he could change his mind, a voice called from inside. "Come in." His breath caught, but his feet moved forward. Inside, the room was sleek and modern. A large window stretched across the far wall, giving a view of the skyline. At the center of it all sat a man in a dark suit, legs crossed, completely at ease. Mid-40s, sharp features, eyes that seemed to measure everything in an instant. "Jason," the man said. It wasn't a question. Jason swallowed. "Yeah." The man gestured to the seat across from him. "Sit." Jason did. His hands rested on his lap, fingers twitching slightly. The man studied him for a moment before speaking. "You helped someone the other night without hesitation. That caught my attention." Jason felt his throat tighten. Who are you?" The man smiled slightly. "Someone with resources. Someone who believes the right kind of people should be given the right kind of opportunities." Vague. Too vague. Jason shifted in his seat. "So what is this? A job offer?" The man nodded. "In a way. It's more than a job. It's an opportunity." He leaned forward. "Tell me, Jason, what do you want?" Jason blinked. "What do I want?" "Yes. In life. Right now. If you could change one thing, what would it be?" Jason exhaled sharply. His mind screamed stability, security, a way to pay his bills, to finish school, to not feel like he was drowning every month. But he didn't say any of that. Instead, he said, "I want to know why I'm here." The man smiled again, slow and knowing. "You're here because I think you have potential. Because I think you understand something most people don't. How to recognize a moment that matters." He leaned back. "And if you're willing to take a leap, I can give you something better than just another paycheck." Jason's heart pounded, but he still had no idea what he was actually being offered. Jason's palms felt damp against his jeans. He had no idea what this was, but every instinct in his body told him that whatever came next was going to be important. The man in the suit, still unnamed, still unreadable, leaned back in his chair, watching him like a chess player studying the board. "I'm offering you a way out," he said. "A way forward." Jason frowned. "Out of what?" The man smiled like he had been waiting for that question. "Out of the cycle you're in. You work hard, but you're stuck. The wrong job, the wrong people controlling your future. One person makes a decision, and suddenly you're unemployed. That's not real power, Jason. That's survival." Jason felt his jaw tighten. He didn't like how accurate that was. "I'm listening," he said carefully. The man nodded, satisfied. "Good. I run a private organization. We work with people who have potential, who have the instincts to recognize opportunities others miss. We place them in positions where they can grow, learn, and eventually have influence. Jason's head tilted slightly. What kind of positions? The man chuckled. Nothing illegal, if that's what you're asking. He gestured toward the window. The world is built on relationships, Jason. Power isn't just money. It's access. It's knowing the right people, being in the right places at the right time. You already proved you have that instinct. Jason swallowed. Because I picked up someone's phone? The man held his gaze. Because you understood that small moments matter. Most people don't. Jason sat back, his mind spinning. So, what exactly are you offering me? A start, the man said simply. A paid position. Travel, mentorship, connections. A way into a world that most people never get to see. It sounded like something out of a movie. Like the kind of thing that happened to other people, not him. But why me? Jason asked. The man's expression didn't change. Because you didn't hesitate. And because people like you don't come around often. Jason stared at him, trying to read between the lines. Was this real? Was this a mistake? Was he about to agree to something he'd regret? His life wasn't exactly going as planned. He could try to find another job, go back to scraping by, fighting for every dollar. Or he could take a risk. Jason took a slow breath, his heart hammering. He looked the man in the eye. I'm in. The man's smile widened just slightly. Smart choice. Jason didn't know what he had just agreed to, but something told him he would never be the same again.